Hey everyone. So for my final project for this here class, I decided to go with option two, doing some sort of creative project. And this time around, what I wanted to do was kind of combine my professional and creative background as well. I'm a professional artist with what we're doing here with literary theory. So I would love to show you the piece that I had worked on for this. However, the client has already picked it up. um, what had happened was I'd gotten privately commissioned, yay me, to do a recreation of a piece that I did for my MFA show last year. Client was walking past Ace Hardware where it was on display and saw it, got my contact info from the owner of Ace Hardware, and reached out to me saying, hey, I want this in my house, but I don't want that one. I want a bigger one. So a giant canvas and a few hours of trying to recreate something in ink and tattoo ink on paper as acrylic and ink on not paper, canvas. Yeah, he just came and picked that up today. So yeah, I can't show it in the video. However, I do have time lapse, which you saw at the beginning of the video, and slowed down time lapse so you can kind of see some of the more nuances of the piece here and there. Anyway, the video, or the artwork, will be in the video. It just won't be in this video. So for the creative project, what I decided to do was, aside from the painting, which you can't see, I'm also doing a literary analysis of that work, as well as, well, instead of making like a film or something like that, because I didn't really know how to do that effectively for making a painting, what I'm doing instead is, welcome to my studio. I'm going to give you a little artist talk. I'll show you how I mixed up some of the colors, some of the materials that I used. You can see my unholy, abominable mess that is my studio. But let's go ahead and get into the nitty gritty of this, because I know it's only supposed to be a 10 to 15 minute video and I don't want to bore you to death with, whatever we're doing now. So without further ado, let's go over project parameters, process and layout, what I was doing when I created the original work, and what is then translated into the final work. So parameters for the project were, like I said, I got privately commissioned doing a painting. I'm going to look at said painting and do a literary analysis of it. Neat. Specifically, I'm looking into Freudian ideas of the uncanny and the parallels I found with the Sublime, as discussed in artistic aesthetics. I guess aesthetics in general, but in my experience has always been in the context of, fine art. So process and layout, three components to this project. First, the painting itself. There it was on this easel behind me. It's not there anymore. Secondly, the creative documentation. That's what we're doing here. And also the time-lapse video that I took, and otherwise photographs and all that good stuff. And then third, the complete video along with the literary analysis. And my computer just turned off. I need my notes. So yeah, that's basic process, layout. Let's go into process of the painting itself. Now, like I said, this was a remake of one I'd already done. The original was about 12.6 by 9.4 inches, so pretty small. It was Sumi ink and old tattoo ink, because I'm also a tattoo artist, fun fact. And that was on Japanese kozo paper. Very thin, very delicate. The client wanted 2 foot by 3 foot on canvas. Had to rethink the materials a little bit. You can't really do the inks the same way. They're not going to behave the same way. The tattoo ink definitely is going to get crusty, and you don't want to go there. So what I did was put down an entire base in Sumi ink, because as you can see from that big one behind me, that does work on canvas pretty well actually. And instead of tattoo ink, I used acrylic paint, which I happen to have a ton of, even though I don't really work with acrylic much. Another fun fact, I suck with acrylics. Except somebody just bought one, so go figure. It forced a reconsideration of manipulation of materials, how each one would react to the varying surfaces. Gravity has a lot to do with this, I found out, as you probably saw in the time lapse. A lot of drippage. Had to kind of catch it with paper towel. So yeah, that's basic what we did here. Canvas up there, me with brushes going, doing the whole Bob Ross thing. Um, didn't really make happy little trees though, just a couple of moody bushes, or well, one moody bush. There are two. The other one has a companion piece. Yeah, just rambling here. Anyway, so that's basically what I did for this project. Made a painting, doing a literary analysis of it, and sold said painting. Neat. So now you basically know what I was going to do. You saw the time lapse. I'm going to go ahead and do a slowed down one to put here now so you can kind of see like the individual strokes and so we can pad out this video a little bit. And then we'll go into the literary analysis, or yeah, putting in the theoretical perspective of Freudian notions of the uncanny and the sublime. So let's do that. So before we get into the literary perspective on things, I'll tell you about the work itself. So the original work, I'm going to be talking mostly about the original here, and by extension, the commissioned remake, which you saw painted. So the original work, which was simply titled Bush 2, because there was already another one called Bush. That was a cornerstone piece in my MFA exhibition at the Willard Wankelman Gallery. What I hope to do with my entire exhibition was immortalizing little moments spent out in the natural world. I'm a bit of an outdoorsman, and I find that, well, I absolutely love being out in nature. I connect with it. I don't really connect much with the goings-ons of humans and things like that. It's not really interesting to me. And the reason I select landscape the way that I do, and I carefully frame things the way that I do, is there's very rarely, if ever, any human agency in my paintings. As a new romanticist, my work affords me a means for escapism. That's primarily why I paint. It's I create these little worlds that I can escape into. It's given agency only by my brush, and they're free from worldly or mental burdens. They're simply just uninhibited nature, no imprint of humanity. It's all coming from here. But they're all little sublimations of areas that I've either lived in, spent time in, or otherwise have some sort of emotional attachment to. The bush piece that we're talking about for this was actually a sublimation of the ugliest piece of landscaping you ever did see. These bushes that are at the end of the driveway at my parents' house, aka my childhood home. My dad planted them in the early 90s. Once my folks split, my stepdad has been taking care of these things ever since. They've been there for years. I remember clear as day, or clear as yesterday, the day they were put in. What did I really mean to say there? Remember as though it were yesterday. Anyway, they're at the end of the driveway, right? They're next to the asphalt of the road. The heat from the summers have cooked these things. They're burnt out, horrible messes. Like, they're really gross looking. Even in the summertime when they're blooming and, they're all full and stuff, they're still not full. They look like decaying, like, shells of a bush. And they're also a hot spot for all the neighborhood dogs to come and use as a restroom. So, they're additionally disgusting. But when I was back home over spring break, my first year of grad school, I was taking my dog, my dearly departed Chihuahua, out for a walk. And I'm just sitting there staring at this thing because at the time I was trying to find reference photos for what would become my MFA show and paintings that I would do. And I find myself just kind of like staring at these overlooked, forgotten, or just otherwise nobody would find it beautiful in the slightest kind of pieces of landscape, and try to work with that and see if you can make something beautiful out of it. And I'm looking at this bush and I'm sitting there, like, on the one hand going, my God, this is disgusting. Like, we should really just uproot it and give it an unceremonial, put it in the trash or something. But as I'm looking and I'm looking at all these like twigs and leaves that have fallen down and created this like, little maelstrom of, I don't even know what you'd call it, like nature's refuse, maybe. Um, I was able to like look at these with like sort of a photographer's lens, looking at these, making little compositions out of them. And that's when I realized, like, wow, I can make something pretty out of this. And something that for me has some sort of nostalgic attachment. And so that ended up being one of the paintings that I did, was referencing those photos and then creating that work. And for me, there's additional nostalgia because the materials that I used were ink and tattoo ink. Again, my background is a tattoo artist. And kind of marrying like sublimation of the oft overlooked with a place with which I have some sort of emotional attachment, and created this piece. So what does all that have to do with the uncanny and the sublime? Glad you asked. Let's get into that now. So in answer to that question, let's go into the literary analysis. The uncanny and the sublime. We're going to start with the uncanny. So Freud puts forth an elaborate definition and analysis of the uncanny. I'm going to quote him here. It is undoubtedly related to what is frightening, to what arouses dread and horror. Equally certainly, too, the word is not always used in a clearly definable sense, so that it tends to coincide with what excites fear in general. Yet we may expect that a special core of feeling is present which justifies the use of a special conceptual term, uncanny. One is curious to know what this common core is, which allows us to distinguish as uncanny certain things which lie within the field of what is frightening. There, adjust my glasses back here. So Freud continues to establish that the core of the uncanny is the notion that it entails the long familiar. Additionally, that which is uncanny tends to fall in line with strange coincidence dictated by chance. For example, you might remember the example that he gave about somebody seeing a specific number repeated multiple times throughout the day that would leave somebody feeling unsettled, or at the very least fixated upon that number. I know I would be. From all this, it can be deduced, at least in the Freudian sense, that the uncanny refers to the phenomenon of emotive response to that which is nostalgic and produces in the beholder strong feeling associated with discomfort or even that which frightens. Cool. What's that all got to do with my painting? Well, elements of that are at play in the painting created for this discourse. Bush 2, remember that's the title, not Bush 1, Bush 2, not Junior, Bush 2. Anyway, it assumes its presence and is given tangible emotive power solely based on the fact that it is a product of my own nostalgia, and it is thus a representation of long familiarity. Neat. This would not necessarily be immediately apparent to, a viewer of the work. I mean, I could say this one behind me is nostalgic for me, and it is, because that's a place I've been, and yada, yada, yada. It may not have any meaning for you. So, what's the point here? Well, Kevin, I'm glad you asked. Anyway, I gave subtle clues for the viewer, notably in the exaggerated colors and textures. The colors were selected to create a palette that are applied in a simplistic, what critics of Haitian art might call intuitive, applied in a simplistic, intuitive manner. In this, there is an element of apprehension. It's designed as commentary on the appropriate response to venturing forth into natural spaces, and the apprehensive end of the employed palette serves as a secondary commentary on the plight of the painting's subject, aka, nature, since I'm landscape focused. However, the more expressive elements of the palette serve as a means to kind of celebrate the unfortunate plant, the bush in this case. The simplistic arrangement of color with haphazard abandon, though it is controlled, is meant to imbue the work with a sense of like childish wonder. And, for me, that harkens back to nostalgia. It's a means to prod the viewer into searching their own psyche for those very same attachments to years long past. That's also why such an unassuming shrub becomes the focus of the work. It's unremarkable in its commonplaceness, and it could be a bush seen by anyone, anywhere. Thus, those who are perchance drawn to the composition become embroiled in their own nostalgia. In this way, the work indeed becomes emblematic of the uncanny. Cool. So we've established that there's an uncanniness there. And I guess you could say additionally that the work being a remake of a smaller original, the resemblance is uncanny. That expression comes from somewhere, right? Yeah, it was said here in the studio when I stood back away from the painting and said, wow, I actually pulled that off. Anyway, we've established the uncanny. Let's go ahead and talk about the sublime. So the sublime. Sharing parallels with the uncanny, the sublime comes to mind as an appropriate point of discussion. Freud himself alludes to its being integral to aesthetics when considering that which is uncanny. Going to be quoting again a lengthy definition here. So, the Oxford English Dictionary defines the adjective sublime in terms of things in nature and art as affecting the mind with a sense of overwhelming grandeur or irresistible power, calculated to inspire awe, deep reverence, or lofty emotion by reason of its beauty, vastness, or grandeur. Get all that? Anyway, similarly, a book that I'm referencing for this, Suzanne Rameljack, I really don't know how it's pronounced. It's Rameljak. Whatever you think it might be, let me know. Anyway, their book Natural Wonders offers compelling context for the sublime as it pertains specifically to artwork geared towards a fixation with the natural world, as in the stuff I do. Quoting again here. As an aesthetic mode, the sublime is a region of pleasurable peril, a wondrous land with deep undertows and the pungent scent of suspense. Encounters with sublimity trigger telltale symptoms, including astonishment, ecstasy, stupor, and terror. While the topography of the sublime has varied across time, common to all expressions is a sense of threatened borders and shattered comprehension. At its core, the sublime encompasses a myriad of extreme emotion. On the one hand, it can incite one's deepest fears and greatly disturb in the context of beholding a work of art. A viewer. That was a little salady, but I think you get the point. Paradoxically, the sublime also entails being absolutely floored by beauty, in some instances presenting with physiological symptoms. Think Stendhal syndrome, which, by the way, is not a real thing. It's more a... Anyway, it's named after somebody who visited Florence and was so floored by its beauty that he became sick or something, and so anytime somebody's floored by a work of art, they kind of call it Stendhal syndrome. It's not real though, but a fun little fact for you. You can read all about it in Dr. Terry Fritch's newest book. Anyway, where was I with this? Oh yeah. So in visual art, talking about the sublime, some things that come off the top of my head that I can give you from art history is Barnett Newman's Vir Heroicus Sublimis. It's a very simple piece. There really ain't much to it. It's a giant rectangle. It's like red, and it's got a couple of lines going down it, what he called zip paintings. So what makes it sublime? I guess the intense color. It's a deep red, so it's actually the kind of red that bands in this hat are. So there's that emotional attachment, but also just the absolute monumental size of the thing. It's like when you walk into the gallery and see that, it's like, whoa, that's a big thing. I don't really get much out of it. It's just one of those things that's drilled into us from art history. Similarly, Mark Rothko's work, which also goes way over my head. They're giant pieces with squares and rectangles that overlap, and they have colors. Yeah, if that's your bag, cool. I don't really get much out of it, but Mark Rothko is considered a genius, and his work sells for way more than mine does, so maybe I don't know what I'm talking about. Anyway, I also bring up Turner with his landscapes, which do a lot for me. They're these great vast landscapes that have that idea of like imminent danger amidst this like wide open beauty. So there are certainly parallels in discussion of the sublime with the uncanny. While the Sublime may or may not invoke nostalgia in the viewer, the experience of overwhelming emotive response, whether from or transcending aesthetics, fits rather nicely with Freud's caveats of fear, discomfort, or even defying definable classification. I would posit that works that awaken a primordial emotive response are, in some capacity, dealing with elements of the long forgotten or nostalgia in general, whether or not the viewer is aware of it. A viewer consumed by their emotions in the beholding of artwork are frequently subject to the myriad of ways in which said artwork plays on their own psyche. This is certainly my experience, and from what I gather, this is true for most who frequent a museum only to be transfixed by one or more especially potent works. So, do I also posit that my work is sublime? I have a hard time challenging, or have a hard time answering that affirmatively, as the experience is entirely subjective. I mean, unlike Newman, though larger than its original on paper, my canvas is not of monumental scale enough to floor a viewer through size alone. My color palettes were chosen with the intent to invoke discomfort, quiet contemplation, and nostalgic wonder. I suppose in this, the work is potentially as sublime as a Rothko. It's about the only time I'd ever want my work and Rothko said in the same sentence, just saying. It is a landscape, though it's a much looser sense of the word. Instead of focusing on vast open fields and great big skies, it's a rotting, decrepit, nasty bush that I made pretty. And somebody paid for it. Go figure. Differing from, say, Turner, my paintings focused on, as I said, a small, exceedingly small component of the landscape. In a way, the work could be read as some strange hybridization of landscape and portraiture. I got that a lot in my critiques. This is all just a very elaborate means for me to say it's not up for me to decide if the work is sublime. That's more for a viewer to decide. To my credit, a kind gentleman saw the original in a store window, was so moved by the work so as to demand my contact information from the store manager, and subsequently commissioned me for a large-scale version thereof. Perhaps through his patronage, sublimity can be read in Bush 2. As to artist's intention, I did, in fact, mean for the work to be read as uncanny, in the Freudian sense of apprehension and nostalgia. I am personally ever seeking the sublime as it exists in nature, and, as a painter, am ever trying to capture this essence on my work surfaces, translating the experience through brush. Whether or not I'm successful in this latter endeavor, though, I kind of just leave for my viewers to decide. So, to recap, looking at my work through the lens of the uncanny and the sublime, there is definitely elements of, well, at least I can definitively say elements of the uncanny in the Freudian sense. There's some apprehension, there's some nostalgia, and, the resemblance is uncanny. As to sublime, like I said, I leave that up to my viewers to decide. If somebody wants to call it that, thank you very much. It is something that's on my mind when I make these things, so yeah. Anyway, thank you for tuning in to my little studio talk here. I'm going to get rid of my notes, grab my camera, and kind of show you around some of the process stuff. So process stuff that you didn't really ask for, but I'm going to give you anyway because I'm awesome like that. Here's the easel that the work was situated on, and it's still adjusted to accommodate the canvas that is no longer there. Sad. Down there is a large assortment of brushes, some of which were used in this work, and that giant overzealous brush over there. And then over here, got a whole bunch of giant tub of Sumi ink. We have got cups that I use to mix up the simple colors that are in the work. One thing I'm particularly proud of, this purple here, that was created by adding, let's see, we got iridescent gold, we got word I can't pronounce, crimson, and no, not Jenkins green, that wasn't used for that. And word I'm not going to bother try pronouncing, blue. Mixed all those together with a little bit of white, and we got this really sweet purple. The oranges, I'm pretty sure you can guess that was made from yellow and red, if you remember color theory. Still got the rags over here from having to dab the thing repeatedly. I think the hair, yep, over here behind my computer, there's the hair dryer to try and accelerate the drying times. There's a whole bunch of acrylics that didn't make the cut. Maybe next time, fellas. And yeah, that's about it. And I'd show you the work, but again, not here. You did see it though. Neat.